we started on up, and my navigator just said, "Mans, have you got your night vision goggles up or down?" And I said, "Up." He goes, "Yeah, leave them that way." Instantly, like a small toddler, I put them down immediately. I'm like, oh my God.
Welcome to The Grit Factor, reimagining grit as part of the whole person in a life that matters. I'm your host, Shannon Huffman-Polson. This season is brought to you by Tiller, the first personal finance service to automate all your daily spending and account balances into spreadsheets, so you can track everything in one place with everything customizable, strict privacy, and no ads. Try Tiller free today at tillerhq.com. Also by the Grit Institute, providing whole leader learning journeys in grit and resilience, purpose and storytelling. Invest in your people for long-term success. Find out more at thegritinstitute.com.
I've not laughed this much on a podcast as I did with Mandy Hickson, a Royal Air Force pilot of the Tornado GR4. Mandy has over 30 years of experience in aviation. She flew the Tornado in hostile environments, including patrolling the no-fly zone over Iraq. And since leaving the Royal Air Force, she retrained as a facilitator and coach in human performance factors. Drawing on her experience of calculated risk-taking, decision-making under pressure, and the critical role of the human in the system, she transfers vivid lessons from the cockpit to other management and leadership contexts. And you're about to get a taste of that in this conversation. Mandy's book, An Officer, Not a Gentleman, retells her inspirational journey to become a pioneering female fighter pilot with her characteristic humor and candor. I can't wait for you to listen in. This is a fun one. Mandy, it's great to have you on today on The Grit Factor.
Oh, thank you so much, Shannon. Honestly, we've seen each other in social media for so long. It's so lovely to actually finally meet almost in person.
Almost in person, and I hope we can make it actually in person one of these days, and I'm sure we'll sort that out eventually.
Yeah, that would be very cool. Yeah.
So where are you zooming in from?
I am zooming in from a place called Winchester, which is in the UK. It's about an hour outside London. So it's the original capital of England. There you go. Bit of history for you. Is that right? I didn't know that. That's good. That's very good to know. It is. It's a lovely spot, actually. Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, so tell us, you've had an extraordinary career, and I am here with not just The Grit Factor, but with An Officer, Not a Gentleman, which is a spectacular read. It is both honest and funny and real and about all of the stuff that you end up doing as a pilot in the Royal Air Force. But we have to start out before that, which is really what you thought about Top Gun. We've got to get these bits, these really gritty details out, don't you? I loved it. I love the gritty details out. Yeah, let's get right into basics. I mean, my God. Well, firstly, I was gutted because I was asked to go on BBC Breakfast, which is like the BBC News channel, to talk about Top Gun, and I couldn't go because I was speaking at an event overseas. So I called up a great friend of mine, and I said, who was a pilot, I said, "Do you want to go on the show?" She said, "Yeah, great." And at the end of it, they said, "And have you got tickets for the premiere tonight?" And she said, "No, sadly not." Well, within minutes, she bloody well did. And so basically she ended up going to the premiere of Top Gun and sending me the photos of her and Tom on the red carpet. Of her and Tom! Oh! Wow! So, to be honest, I was so bitter by the whole thing. Well, I wasn't a little bit bitter, as my husband would say. You were very bitter. I was like, yeah, fair enough. But no, I did go and see it. I loved it. I love the fact it wasn't quite as misogynistic as the first one. When I look back, I watched the first one before I went to see it again, and I thought, oh my gosh, it doesn't play out in today's, more woke society, does it? I was like, but it was like that. It really was like that in those days. So I mean, I loved it. But I did love it. I loved it. I had to take a little pinch of Hollywood and say it was fine on that one, though. Please do, because you have to do that. You have to. It's very Hollywood. Yeah, I mean, one of the ones I really loved around it, though. Have you seen James Corden and the Late Night Show in America?
I have not seen it, but that doesn't say much because I'm not much on TV. So,
okay. So basically, there's a guy called James Corden. He's an English comedian, actually, and he runs the late night show over in the US. And he has basically interviewed Tom Cruise, and they went out flying together. And it's the most hilarious 20 minutes of footage. And I absolutely loved that. And it just set me off for Top Gun perfectly. Yeah. I thoroughly recommend Googling that one. It's a really funny watch.
That's awesome. I have to say, ever since they were supposed to air like in 2020, right? Wasn't it supposed to go out on 2020? And then, of course, COVID and everything else. And I was just waiting. I was like, is there going to be a female pilot? Is there going to be a female? If there's not a female pilot, it's complete crap. And I was like, I was just getting ready. Like, you just have to kind of rev up. And, and anyway, Phoenix saved the day, I guess.
Phoenix did save the day. She did indeed. And I love the fact that there's a Barbie Phoenix as well out there.
Isn't that spectacular?
I've been trying to get hold of a copy. It is. I've been trying to get hold of one, but they're not selling them over here in the UK.
So, Mandy, we have actually this Athena's Voices, which I am lucky to be friends with some of the ladies that are part of it, but we have a group to give out. So I will send me your email or send me your mailing address. But then you have to like publicize it, right? Like that's the whole thing is, I'll cut this part out, but yeah, you have to kind of let people know and do pictures with it. And anyway, I'll send one your way.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Good. Excellent. That's fabulous. Well, so when you went in for the Royal Air Force, and please correct any of my terminology that I get wrong, you were a pilot already, right?
Yes. So I'd got a scholarship while I was at university. So it's a little bit different to like the ROTC sort of system over there. So we go to university. A few people can be sponsored through university, but the majority of people join an organization called the University Air Squadron, it's almost like a club. You're at university doing your course and you just join a club and you go along for one town night, one squadron night a week, and you can fly though, and they have a proper flying squadron for you, and you book and go flying whenever you want. And so I booked in and went flying an awful lot, hence I didn't do very well in my degree, but I did gain about 160 hours of flying, and I had my private pilot's license. So I'd almost done the entirety of the elementary flying training syllabus before I actually taken on as a pilot.
So, and I was reading towards the beginning of your book, you're talking about this application process and going in for the aptitude tests, and it's not quite set up for women.
Yeah, well, it wasn't then, actually, to be honest, Shannon, and it has changed now. So, when I applied, I mean, they'd never had women applying particularly before. So when they changed the rules, I was almost in that very first wave. The first female pilot, Jo, she was already in the Air Force when they changed the rules. So she didn't have to go through the whole sort of officer training. She was already in. So she just changed across. But no, for myself, I applied and I failed all of these aptitude tests and then failed them again. And actually I was really lucky that someone on my squadron, the boss of my squadron, he couldn't understand why there was this disparity between someone that's performing at a really high level in the air that can't pass the tests. He started to investigate and he found out that the majority of women that took the test failed them, and compared to men that were passing them. And so in the end, the Air Force took me on as a test case, basically to see how far I'd get before I failed, I found out. And it's been interesting because this year I've taken over a role with our Department for Transport, so a government position, voluntary position as an aviation ambassador. And I've been talking to a lot of aviation groups all over the UK, and it's amazing how many women I'm speaking to who are pilots of my age, and they say we failed the tests, and so we ended up not joining the Air Force and ended up going to the airlines at an earlier stage. And she said, and one of them said, I failed the test, and I was told that they'd just taken on a test case and that this person was going to test it out. She said, and that was you. So basically, you're the one that stopped all of us from getting in. I was like, oh, sorry about that.
So what was it that was specific that somehow kept women out?
Well, I don't really know, and I quite often get asked that, and I've tried to do like some searching to find out what it was, but I think they were just designed by men for men, and they'd only been tested on men. And then when they saw this huge disparity between men and women that passing, they realized there was an unconscious bias within their testing system. So they actually spent a lot of time. In fact, it took them 4 years to come up with a new design. I was then front line, and I just got back from serving in the Gulf, and I came back and they said, Flight Lieutenant Wells, would you come back and redo these tests? And I thought, oh my God, what happens if I fail them now? Am I just really crap? They're just going to get rid of me and say, you failed the test even though I'm qualified. But I passed them then with flying colours, which one would hope, because I did have quite a lot of experience by then. But yeah, a bit scary.
Yeah, well, I love too that you point out that you find out that you don't pass this initial battery of tests, but you have just won an aerobatics competition. You have two flight instructors vouching for you. So it's not as though there's any question about your ability at all, right?
No, so it was just interesting, and it was an interesting time to be going through. So I just think, yes, there was a lot of luck. There was a lot of dogged determination of not giving up as well. And, and it's just that perseverance, isn't it, when you need to. I tell you what it's called. They should call it the grit factor.
They should call it the grit factor. I think, Mandy, you have the grit factor, and I so wish I'd talked to you before that, but this is why we get to talk today. So which is perfect because you certainly have it in spades. But I think back now, like as we're talking about this, and think back to, it's one thing to process that, when you've done it. You've already done it. You've gone through your career. You're now an ambassador. You're out talking to people. But like thinking back to yourself when you're 20 or 22 years old, it's different, right? It's a different place where I at least did not have the confidence that I have today when I was 22 years old. So how would you describe, like, because there's a lot of anxiety, and you talk about that, right? I wrote down one of your quotes. I was aware that I had been taken on as a sort of a test case, and there was a huge burden that came with that, right?
Yeah, because you're sort of not wanting to let people down. You're constantly trying to, live up to those expectations, and are really aware that if you then fail,
yes,
you're almost sort of giving them all of the evidence that they need to say, yeah, well, that's because the reason women are failing the test is because women are not good enough. And so I really felt this need to pass. But the other thing that it really planted in me was this horrible imposter syndrome. And I never had it before that point. I'd always been quite confident. And suddenly I was told that I was being taken on to see how far I'd get, probably before I failed. And that just planted this horrible seed of doubt, and every time I would struggle, I'd think, oh, is this as far as I get? And there was always that in the back of my mind, I'll be honest.
Yeah. No, I can absolutely relate to that. And I think back as you try to process these things and try to understand them. And I know there's so much happening in all different branches, not just of service, but also in the corporate world and in other places as well, where we're saying these types of ways of presenting things or interacting with people, they have an impact in the everyday moment, and they have an impact over the course of your ability to show up, right? And it's really, I think Deborah Rhodes at Stanford called this a double crucible, right? This idea that women or minorities that are coming into these positions and are both having to deal with the complexities of the position, which are really difficult, right? You're deploying to combat, you're flying fighters, you're doing these crazy maneuvers. And on top of that, you have this additional kind of full-time job of managing this challenge of feeling like an imposter, which somebody else has imposed, right? It's not that you went in with that necessarily, but somebody else is sort of requiring that you manage that on top of the requirements of the job.
Yeah, and I think, you put on top of that as well, you're the only woman. On a squadron of 200 men, you're the only woman, and all of those little intricacies that go with that as well. And you're thinking, I don't think I realised quite the burden on me at the time. What I've realised since leaving, I think at the time I just wanted to fit in. I wanted just to be the best I could be. I didn't want to let myself down. I didn't want to let, future generations of women down. But I just was doing the best I could do. Sure. On leaving, I've realised, especially not immediately on leaving, again, I sort of just carried on doing, I went into sort of motivational speaking, but it was more to go to schools. I just wanted to go to schools to sort of give them that you can't be what you can't see feeling to it.
Sure.
And only now, really, after putting the book out, did I realise that, you know what, and it was really lovely, actually. It was Mace Curran that said to me, what I loved about you, Mandy, is that you're very much putting that ladder down and you haven't pulled it up behind you. The ladder is deeply rooted now to allow the next generations to literally climb up that ladder and to swarm up if they want to. And you thought, actually, that's a really nice analogy. And I hadn't really got my head around the fact that I almost have a responsibility now to be there as an ambassador, to be there as someone that youngsters can see, to go, her dad, ran his own carpet business. Her mum was a teacher. She wasn't from this amazing military background and stock. I mean, my grandpa was a pilot in the Second World War, but if she can do it, I can do it. And I think that's that whole mindset thing. And I've realized that responsibility, I think I do take quite seriously now.
Yes. No, it's a big one, right? I mean, it is something you start to see more and more. And I feel like in 2022, you think, gosh, it's aren't we past this? Like, didn't we just do this like several decades ago? And
Yeah,
decades before that, there were the WASPs, and decades before that, there were women in Russia and in France, right? But no, we do. We have to keep doing it because it's still a thing. And that's across all industries, really.
it is. I mean, there's this brilliant video that I just sort of summed it up to me, and it was they had it was with a charity I work for, and they took in a female fighter pilot, a female surgeon, and a female firefighter, and they went into a primary school, young sort of 6 and 7-year-olds in their civilian clothing, dressed up, and they said, "Oh, can you all draw pictures of a fighter pilot?" And they all drew men, all 60 kids, apart from 3 pictures had a woman on there. So out of these 60 children, 57 of them drew a man and called them Bob and Steve and all these names. And afterwards, the 3 women went out, then they came back wearing their outfits, their suits and their, surgical kit and all the rest of it. And the children said, "Why are you dressed up like that?" And they said, no, we are them. And they sort of took a while to process that these women they'd just been talking to were them. And so what I'm saying is these sort of definitive roles are actually intrinsically built into our kids before they even start at kindergarten, so that sort of level. And one girl, and this was really lovely, said after all of this chat, the female fighter pilot started to leave, and this girl said to her, "Are you going to give your husband his kit back now?" So even after all that, she still hadn't got the fact that she was not just borrowing this kit, that she was the pilot. So I think there's still a space to do that. There's still a lot of space to do that, really.
Yes, yes. I will say I just sent my my 9-year-old off to soccer camp this morning, or football camp, I guess you would call it. And he's wearing my hat that was from when I was stationed in Korea, and it's actually I was a logistics officer there. But it's got all the helicopters on the sides and all the flags and all that stuff, and on the back it has my maiden name is Huffman. And I just love that he loves to wear that. And then when people ask him about it, it's like, "Oh, it's my mom's." I'm like, "Yes, it's your mom's." That's right.
Well, I've got these T-shirts which have "Dream It, Believe It, Do It," which is my mantra, and there's like a fast jet that's doing on the front. And I gave them to my sons for Christmas. I've only seen that my sons are 17 and 18, so it's a little bit different. Yeah. And I did see my son in the gym, and he was wearing it. I was like, "Oh yeah." I said, "No." Awesome. He said, "The only time I would wear this is in the gym."
Well, Mandy, I need one of those T-shirts too. We're gonna have to swap boxes. That's great. I love it. That's awesome.
It's just the way he said, "Don't ever think I'd wear this out in public normally. I'm only wearing it in the gym." I was like, that's fair.
Yeah, but then they're into fashion at that point, right? And my kids are too small for that still, but that's great. So as you went through your training and then you're finally qualified, and you're the only woman in these large squadrons. Do you call them squadrons or flight detachments or?
Yeah.
So you come around and you talk about your team is everything, right? And how. So the thing that I want to talk about here, or kind of like pull apart a little bit, is, and you may not have had all of these experiences, but what happens when the team doesn't work? Like if you go in and they don't accept you, or because I think that there are people that I talk to, finance organizations just like you do, right? Or engineering organizations, or where are the others that are really big ones? But there's still a lot of industries. Accounting is another big one. Law, even though there's a lot of women at the early end, there's not a lot of women later, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you do when the team doesn't work?
Yeah, so I think I had that a little bit actually. So when I say I had a phenomenal team, I had a phenomenal team going through training.
Yes.
And I think you might have experienced that as well, because they become your brothers in arms. These are your best mates. You're going through such amazing experiences together. And I think that intensity just creates this really, really strong bond. Yeah. And then when you ping out the other end, and you've been with them for 4 or 5 years by now, you ping out the other end and you arrive on a squadron and you have never met these guys before. You're the only woman, you're the first pilot they've ever had. And there was no female toilets, for example. I mean, every screensaver was a naked woman on the computer. Yes. So I made them all into naked men. Next day, they were all landscapes. It's amazing that subtle changes. But they were not used to having a woman around. But I tell you, I mean, we when I used to go to the Gulf, I was always given the room which had wall-to-wall pornography on the walls. I would strip it all down, stick it outside and yell, "Porn's up, boys." And then they would all come and get the porn and all the rest of it. But the room next door to me had none on the walls. They always gave me that room as a joke. You know, it was almost like this. And so there was one guy there that I actually did suffer from him bullying me. You know, every briefing, he was asking me questions. He wanted to belittle me. He wanted to make me small. He caught me out. And every time I walked outside, everyone would fall silent. And I knew they were talking about me. And it was this horrible feeling of thinking, do you not really realize what I'm up against here? There's no female company out of 200 men. I'm sharing shower blocks with you. I'm walking around in a towel. I'm in the same block. I'm sleeping, eating with you guys 24/7, not sleeping with them like that, I assure you. And actually, do you know what? The pressure was enormous. Put on top of that, you're actually bullying me as well. And it made me actually, I realized at that point that I was really struggling, and actually I seriously considered quitting. And my husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, just said, "Mans, I can't believe we're even having this conversation. You know, this is everything you've worked for, and you're about to give it all up after just one tour in Iraq." And I said, "You don't know what it was like." And he said, "Right, just speak to him." So we were in the bar when we got home, and I, with my Dutch courage of a little bit of alcohol and my best wingman in the world, my husband, we went up to him and I said, "Are you aware you made my life a living hell out in the Gulf?" And he said, "What?" And his wife was with him, and she said, "You did what?" You know. And basically I told him what had happened, what from my perspective, and he just looked shell-shocked. And then he said, "I'm going to come back to you on this, Mandy." And he actually reflected on it all weekend, and on the Monday morning called me into his office and he said, "Mandy, you're right. I did exactly what you said, and I am so sorry. My wife had just had our second baby. She was 3 weeks old when I left to come to the Gulf. I was really upset I wasn't there. I was feeling racked with guilt that my wife was dealing with a toddler and a 3-week-old baby. I was missing the first 4 months of my baby's life. I felt angry, and you were an easy target, and I'm so sorry." And I thought, you know what? I've got so much respect for you. You did make my life hell, but I now respect you for admitting it, for reflecting on it, and for actually telling me the reasons behind it. That it wasn't a personal thing about me. He just chose the person that he felt was the weakest link, which of course I was going to be the weakest link because I stood out like a sore thumb, mainly because I'm 6 foot tall, but also because I do have boobs, you know. But you know, actually, that was it. And you realize that, you know, when there is a team dynamic that's not working, you're better to call it out early. If I'd called it out 3 months previously, I wouldn't have been in this awful spiral of hating the environment I was in. But it takes confidence to do that, and it's easier said than done. But you know, I've seen it. My stepdaughter's joined the police force, and she had an incident with a guy at work. And I said, "Call it out now. Call it out sooner rather than later. Do not let it spiral." And she did. And she said, "Thank God I did, Mandy. You know, it was amazing." Called it out, and things have been actioned straight away. Because that's what we need to do. But that's because we have the confidence of 49 years old, talking to a 25-year-old who doesn't have that life.
You know, I just made a recommendation of 5 books. Of course, I had to include The Grit Factor, but and now I need to have 6 because this one needs to be on here. And now Atomic Habits needs to be on there. Anyway, you're going on the list of the books that I have a bookshop that people have to read. You know, one of them is Fierce Conversations, and Susan Scott actually is out of Seattle, and I think it's one that I want every young leader of male or female to read, right? Because you've got to be able to have those conversations, and you can only be as successful as the tough conversations you're willing to have.
Yeah. And I think that's something that, you know, we do shy away from. I mean, I personally hate conflict. So I know in my own mind, I back away from conflict. I tend to not say it rather than say it. But I have learned over time to, especially in the workplace, I think, having those difficult conversations, those fierce conversations. I like that actually, because it's always saying I'm got courage. It's a fierce conversation. It's not conflict. It's not. And it's about recognizing behaviors. It's commenting on the behaviors that we're seeing. I think is the key to these fierce conversations, not commenting on someone's personality, because we can change behavior, but we can't change our personalities. So, you know, and obviously we morph our behaviors constantly within the groups that we're working in. And so, you know, if we can comment on the behavior, then people at least get a point to change.
Exactly. Right. If they're big enough to do it, they have the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, there'll always be the few that aren't, but you know, and that is what it is. Well, so you went, and now you're qualified, and talk about your airframes a bit, which I'm not going to be able to be smart enough to ask you good questions about because I was a helicopter pilot. But yeah, what was your favorite to fly?
I think the Tornado GR4. So the Tornado GR4 is probably the most similar one as your F-15.
Yeah.
Although the F-15 wins in top, you know, every time. I noticed that. Someone gave me some fast jet top trumps. I was like, Tornado's lost again.
Oh,
like,
no.
all right, stop asking that one. But yeah, it's amazing aircraft. You know, it did what it said on the tin. It looks like a warfighting machine.
Yes.
And I love the ground attack role. I love the complexity of planning missions, you know, low level flying. You know, I mean, as a helicopter pilot, you get a nosebleed above about 200 feet, don't you?
We do.
So,
We do.
Yeah, well, I love that too. You know, so that was my favorite flying ever, would be doing operational low flying in Canada, you know, where you can drop down to 100 feet and you're over that Labrador and that whole area there where it's really covered in trees. And on one occasion, oh my gosh, I'll never forget it. We were flying over this forest and you drop down to as low as let's say your bottom cheeks will allow you to go, because you're clenching them so tight, you're thinking, crikey, I'm going low. And your navigator sort of going, and we were being bounced by another aircraft, and we were in a foreship, and we were hitting targets like within seconds. And I'm really working hard, and I'm scanning my scan patterns really fast. And we suddenly saw this tree, and we were on the edge of sort of a lake, and my nav just went, oh my God, these trees are saplings. They've only just been planted. Oh my God. And we were positioning ourselves of what we felt was 100 feet away from these trees, but the trees were tiny. And so we were probably only flying at about 50 feet.
Wow.
You know, because ultimately you're positioning yourself 100 feet above the ground, and that is nothing, because these trees were like Christmas trees, you know.
Oh, and how fast are you going?
Oh, 600, you know, 550 miles an hour. So,
that's awesome.
Quick. So,
just like Top Gun, Mandy. Just like Top Gun, the final mission.
Yeah, it was just like Top Gun, actually. In fact, that G-force even got my cheeks going, just like Tom. Yeah, I look so young, Shannon. You know, it's all that G-force.
He's 59, I understand. So
no, unbelievable.
I know.
He's actually in an anti-aging machine, I think he is. But yeah, he's incredible. But so that was probably my favorite aircraft to fly. But we also are training aircraft, which is probably like, oh, what's your one? It's the T something, isn't it? Like a fast jet trainer. But anyway, ours is the Hawk, and it's the one that our Red Arrows fly, our formation team, the Red Arrows fly. And I loved that. That's a fantastic training aircraft. It was like, you know, they used to say, kick the tires and light the fires and off you go. And whereas Tornado took like 45 minutes to start it all up and get all the loading of all the missions in, the Hawk you get into and you're like, yep, ting, 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 off we go. It's brilliant. So there was a sort of like, you know, little mini fast jet. That was like the mini Metro. That was a real sports car-y feel to it. Yeah.
That's fabulous. And then of course you learn to fly these things, and then and I love, by the way, that you say that you and I totally relate as well, but that you're conflict averse, but you like the ground attack role. I love that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, doesn't quite sit personal. Could we just say personal conflict? Happy to go to war, but just don't like conflict.
Yeah. That's so true. No, it's so true. It's very different, right? And I actually do think, as people talk about what's where the challenges in the military, how was it really hard to fly? I'm like, yeah, it was hard to fly, but the flying's amazing. That's not where the hardest stuff is. The hardest stuff is out of the cockpit, right? In the cockpit.
Yeah.
But at the same time, going to war in the cockpit is something quite different. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I did 3 tours of duty in Iraq. One of them actually was following on from doing a fantastic exercise in Red Flag, actually, and it was great. So we did Red Flag out just outside Las Vegas at Nellis Air Force Base. And the training in Red Flag is brilliant. I mean, that is Top Gun, isn't it? I mean, it's just phenomenal. And the huge big packages that go up with, you know, the American fighter pilots against you, and they're blooming good at their job of simulating, of shooting you down, and they're really talented. I'm like, damn, God again. Thank you for that. So
you
yeah,
have to do 200 push-ups afterwards, just like in Top
I did
Gun?
not have to do that.
Oh, good. Just checking. All right, go ahead.
Can I do them on my knees? I'll be like, can I do them on my knees? Because I'm really tall and it really hurts my back.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
It's a small point. Yeah, it's and so actually many of the characters that we'd been working with in Red Flag, when I was in the Gulf, we were working on a site and we would often be working with the same guys as well, which was really quite nice actually with all the Americans, because we were working really closely together. So yeah, I was there in the build up to Gulf War II, so it was when we were defending the no-fly zone over southern Iraq. And I did just under 45 combat missions in total.
Wow. What stands out for you there? I know you talk about one in your book at the very beginning. Tell us.
I do. Yeah, I do. I mean, there's a couple of big ones. One was one where we were had a very different mission actually, when we were tasked to prosecute an attack on a fiber optics center, which was just to the south of Baghdad. And up to that time, we'd been up to what's called the 33rd parallel. So it's sort of about a third of the way up, whereas Baghdad, as you can imagine, is halfway up Iraq. So we were just operating in the bottom third of the country. So President Bush had just taken over, Junior had just taken over, and all of the intelligence that we were getting was about to go underground with these fiber optic cells. And so our task was to basically destroy the building. And it was a huge mission. And I just remember turning northbound. We started on up and my navigator just said, "Mans, have you got your night vision goggles up or down?" And I said, "Up." He goes, "Yeah, leave them that way." Instantly, like a small toddler, I put them down immediately. I'm like, oh my God. And there's flak and there's surface to air missiles coming up. It looked like the 4th of July. It was just fireworks and all of these weapons going off in front of us. So we were going into this barrage of literally ammunition, which was fine. Most of it seemed to be being fired indiscriminately and not targeting specifically. So that gave me a little bit of peace. Right. But I was in a cooperative attack with my wingman. So I was lasing the target and he was dropping the weapon. And we lased a building and we were lasing one side of it. And afterwards, and the weapon went in, and we then traveled home, we landed, and then the American crews who had been operating the Predator, the unmanned aerial vehicle, the drone above us, said, "Hey, my goodness, do you want to come and see this? We've got some phenomenal footage of your target." And I was like, "Oh yeah, okay." So we went over to see it, and I'll be honest, it was a moment for myself. It's not a moment that I'll ever forget, because we watched a guy walk out of this door and he lit a cigarette, and you could see it because it's all on thermal imaging. He lit a cigarette, he was having a cup of coffee. He threw the coffee on the floor, and you can see this big patch of white, that white heat lit up. Yeah. He stuck the cigarette down, he turned, he shut the door. At that exact moment, our weapon entered the building. But the fuse was set to deploy basically the weapon underground, so there's a delay of fusing of that, so it went off underground, at which point the door opens and our man walks straight out the building and runs to get in his car, and then he just drives off straight through a fence, and he pulls the fence along with him, which is phenomenal. In fact, I was on Air Warriors. It was incredible. I was on Air Warriors, which is on the Smithsonian Channel, talking about the tornado, and they did some fantastic footage from that, and they pulled up loads of the footage and actually did a really good reenactment of it. I was like, must get hold of that.
Oh, fantastic! I'll link to that. I'll link to that on.
Yes, that's a really good one to see actually, and it really brought it into. But what was interesting was the guys around me, was a lot of banter. It was sort of like, oh yeah, I didn't feel like that. I never was a war thirsty person. I wasn't sort of like that. So I was doing it because I love the flying and I'm very happy to serve my country. But it's when you see that, I was really relieved he'd not been killed. Yes. Because I'm not wanting to kill somebody. That's not the point. You're doing your job because you're defending your country, even in different nations and things like that. But actually, you don't want to kill people. That's not the whole point of it.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that. It's interesting. It's a funny question that people end up asking. I feel like a lot of times, like, oh, did you ever, shoot a target where, essentially, did you ever kill anybody? And which is a terrible question, by the way, for people to ask. And I always felt, I both feel a little bit shy and inadequate next to people who went to Iraq, because I was in Bosnia and I was in Korea, but I was between the deserts, I always say. And But I am so grateful that I never had to shoot a target like that. We
Yeah.
loved going to gunnery. I love shooting. I love the gunnery, right? That's fabulous. But I always thought that, of course, you do it. Of course, you do your mission. And that, probably when I went home to process, it would have been a really difficult thing to do. So
yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? Retrospectively, you're processing it. And I did,
yes.
and I did have another mission where we were literally on the target run, and I was on the countdown, 10 seconds to go. My nav just went stop, stop, stop. All my switches were made. I was literally had my finger on the big red button to release the weapon in the cockpit. And my nav said, stop, stop, stop. All the switches are made, and we pulled off target. And I said, what happened? He said, oh, there's a man with a camel and he would be within the fragmentation zone of our weapon. And it was not a priority 1 target.
Right.
It was a lower priority target that was to have no civilian collateral damage, at which point it's non-debatable. And I really like that. So I can still say from the hand on heart that I've never dropped a weapon that I believe has actually killed anyone. So that sits really well with me to be able to say that, it's one of those things. And so I do feel exactly the same as you. And I know that a lot of my friends I think the big difference for myself and a lot of my colleagues that flew in Afghanistan is that I was in a high level war, a medium level war. We were above 20,000 feet. They were in the weeds, much like the Apache and things like that. Sure. You're seeing the consequence of your actions immediately.
Yes.
And that's a very different thing. And I know that a lot of them have really suffered from PTSD as a consequence of that, of being in those conflicts.
Sure. And you hear this too about the drone pilots, right? That are operating out of bases that are very safe, but then they go, they're having to do these real missions, and then they go pick up their kids from football practice, right? Or from piano lessons. And I just, that disconnect, that cognitive disconnect is...
I think it's huge. I think they're going to do something serious about this, actually, because I think... actually, it's going to lead to enormous mental health problems, because you cannot be in a war zone 1 minute and literally picking your children up or getting a text saying, why are you late for work, picking the kids up? It doesn't work. You have either got to be... That's why I think when I was in Iraq, I was just in Iraq. We were based in Kuwait. That's my life. We had 1 20-minute phone call home a week. You're focused, you're mission orientated.
Yes.
If I was thinking, oh my gosh, I need to sort my children out.
Right.
It just wouldn't go. And I think that's where you're right. This cognitive disparity that they've got going on is huge. And I think they're going to have to do something about that.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, you're right. It's tough. Beyond tough, it's actually going to be something that needs a lot of time to...
I'd love to know what the psychologists are thinking about that and what they're going to do about it, actually.
Yeah, exactly. Right. That would be a great, that would be a great follow-up, actually, in terms of another conversation.
Yeah. Because have you seen that film, Eye in the Sky?
Yes.
Which really does hit home, because one of those guys that was the drone operator, and that was really struggling.
That's right.
And you can see that whole, mental anguish that he's going through was phenomenal.
Yeah. I really, that was actually, I don't know how we came across that one, but it was a great movie.
It's because it's got a wonderful female actress in it.
There was that. Yeah. So speaking of
English actress, also.
English, yes, and that as well. You guys have some pretty. You have some phenomenal people to follow for sure. So don't you have now a new woman who is the head of the British forces? Is that right?
Not quite. So basically, a very good friend of mine, Soraya, who's in my book, is now the highest ranking female aircrew ever. So she's what's called Air Officer Commanding 2 Group. So you have 1 group and 2 group. And so she's taken over that role. We're all so proud. I'm so proud of her. I was texting her, I'm so proud of you. She's like, oh, thanks, Mans. So we have a little mutual admiration society going on here. But yeah, so she's done incredibly well. But no, we haven't ever... what's very interesting is her husband was Air Officer Commanding 1 Group, and he had just finished. So I went through training with the 2 of them, and they are married, and they're both Air Vice Marshal, and they're both called Marshal as well, which is really funny. So they're Air Vice Marshal Marshals. And so they're wondering who's going to get to the top first, because it's going to be one of them.
Oh, that is fabulous. Do they have kids?
Yes, they do, actually. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And they've got 2 children, a boy and a girl. So yeah.
Okay. Oh, that's fantastic. So one of the things I have been thinking a lot about, because it's I feel like the tenor, at least in the States, is we have a part of the States, at least, and I don't know how much the UK would mirror this or not, so you'll have to speak to that, but that is sort of intensely pro-military, right? Like there's not everything about the military is great, which of course is not the case, but there is this feeling, and then there's another part that really doesn't care for it at all, and at the end of the day, the piece that I'd love to pull out of that is this idea of what you mentioned earlier, which is you want to serve your country, right? And this concept of service and this concept of putting yourself forward in a way that you might not come home, right? It's a pretty unique way. It's different than like signing up for the bake sale or running the parent association, because you might not come home, and there's inherent danger and risk to your life in that kind of a service. And I think that is something that is worth talking about, because there's something that's really meaningful and important about that. How do you think about that?
I think when I was doing it, I didn't think about that. I never, it's not that you're invincible,
Sure.
but you have this sort of like shield around you because you're young and you're naive, basically.
Sure. Yeah.
But I was on a squadron when 2 guys died. I helped them plan the mission. It was a training mission, but they were weapons instructors. They were doing their qualified weapons instructors course. So they were the sort of the best of the pilots and navs in the Tornado fleet at the time.
Sure.
And helped plan the mission, and they didn't come home, and they flew into a mountain because they got disorientated in really poor weather. And that sort of really hit home to me, because that was, you are giving the ultimate sacrifice. You have lost your life. Did it then stop us from doing it? No, we got the weekend off. We came back and we carried on flying on the Monday. And, we were all in a state of shock about it, but we didn't almost give ourselves time to process that loss. But I still felt that it wouldn't happen to me. And I started thinking in the Gulf when I was out there, and you're filling in all the will forms and all the rest of it, that if I did die, my family would be upset. Of course it wasn't, but I didn't have any dependents.
Sure.
And I think you go through a change when suddenly you have children, and you realize that now if you're in a war zone and you die, you're going to ruin the rest of your life for your children. They're going to have lost their mum, and that is huge. And I think that changes your risk perception of things then. And I probably became a lot more, I wouldn't say sensible. I've always been, a very much a sensible pilot. I've always very much followed the rules, and I think everyone does. They're not the mavericks,
right,
anymore. And you don't see that anymore. You see really, people who are very, very rule process and process followers. So, which I think is what you have to be. It's just an interesting one on your perception towards risk, I think.
Yes, for sure. And actually that is a great seg into this idea of being willing to take risks. And that's something I feel like in this environment where, and this is talking again, it's not military even so much as it is the corporate world, but so much is in flux right now, right? Over the last few years, so much is in flux. The horizon, we're not flying with instruments, and the horizon is unclear. And nobody likes that. We're really uncomfortable with that kind of disorientation. So how do you talk to people about, in this kind of environment, being willing to take risks, being willing to put yourself out there, being willing to try new things without knowing that they're necessarily going to succeed, and facing failure when things don't work out?
So one thing I often say to everyone is uncertainty is the one thing that they use as a great interrogation technique to break people down. And our world has been faced with uncertainty for 2 years. Once you've got your head around that the parameters are constantly shifting, you're not going, it's all going to be over on Friday. It's not going to be. We don't know when it's going to be over. So once you've got your head around that gives you a point of focus to say, I won't be broken by that then. Okay. Right. So now how are we going to manage this uncertainty? And that's the important aspect, I think, that you then need to think about. And with that comes risk. Now, I would say that the last 2 years is going to be the biggest shakeup in the way that we're working, in the way that we follow rules, because we couldn't just follow the rules. Everyone was sent home, and they had to get IT systems working from personal laptops. People didn't even have their work laptops with them. It was like, oh my gosh, how do we ensure that there is? And so is that a risk we're willing to take? Where is the level of security? So constantly everything was having to be changed. And also there was a risk for the business of saying, I've got to trust my employees.
Yes.
I can't
That's right.
I can't be monitoring them. Are we going to put in keyboard swipes to check that they're at their keyboards? Or are we going to trust them and look at what they're producing?
Exactly.
I.e., we are going to credit people on their productivity rather than their time of showing their faces in the office. And suddenly the whole thing is churned up.
Yes.
And so I think that actually there will be many positives that come out of this in our agility, in that whole response to risk, and the ability to act much, much more quickly, in that whole VUCA world, because actually it's proved that whole volatility and uncertainty we're seeing, it's absolutely what people have been talking about around VUCA, haven't they? So it is interesting.
So talk about a time when you had to face failure, because that's the thing I feel like people have a hard time, all of us have a hard time with that, right? We want to be successful. We don't believe we're going to fly into the mountain. That's of course one that you don't have to face yourself, but somebody else will have to. But yeah, but a time that things didn't go like you expected them to, and maybe were disappointing, and you had to kind of own it and move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best example of that was actually 3 trips before graduating from gaining my RAF wings, and I failed the flight. And then I failed it the next day, and then I failed it the next 3 trips. And then I was put up for a chop ride. And I'm like, oh my God, I have been in the Air Force for 4 years. I've been flying since I was 13 years old. I'm now, 23? So 10 years of flying, about to fail. I'm about to see my dream disappear in front of me. And I was going back to my room every night. My stress bucket was absolutely overflowing, but we didn't talk about stress in those days. What was even stress? I had a skin rash. I wasn't sleeping and I wasn't eating. Went to my doctor and he said, have you changed your washing powder? I mean,
oh my gosh, are you kidding?
So, I mean, I didn't know what it was. And I thought, my God, maybe I have changed my washing powder. And I couldn't know. It's crazy, isn't it? But anyway, I was sitting there in my room and there's a knock on my door. My course mates took me out and they basically had stuck wings on their bikes. And we ended up flying on our bikes up and down this huge parade square, doing the one thing I was failing, which was basically called battle turns. And it was learning about doing synchronized turns at low levels so that you always come out in battle formation, i.e. 3/4 of a mile apart from your wingman. And it means you can't just turn to the left because you're always behind each other. So you've got to plan ahead, work out your numbers, cross that perpendicular angle. When you roll out, you're a beam each other. That's what I was failing. So we were on these bikes and we're cycling and they're yelling 30 starboard, 60 port, rotate. And we did all these maneuvers time and time again. And suddenly my head completely changed. And I thought, oh my God, it's really easy. I flew the mission the next day. I passed it with flying colours. I land and my instructor got out and he kissed the floor behind me. And I thought, oh my God, I failed. He's just relieved I've not killed him and he's celebrating that he's still alive. And he's like, what on earth was that? And I told him what the guys had done. He just said, Mandy, that's incredible because you know what? There was a huge holding system going on where you had to wait for the next course to go. And he said, there's 6 spaces for courses starting immediately. And one of you is going to have to hold, for up to a year. And he said, so one of your course mates had probably jeopardized his own career advancement now by about a year to get you through. And it's like, oh my God. So these guys have been guaranteed starting pretty soon to one of them now is going to have a hold. And they knew that fact. And so it's that whole feeling of like, when you are fearing failure, if you do it alone, that's a very, really tough place to be in.
Right.
But if you have got and I hate to use the cliches, but your trusted wingmen and wing people around you, then, ultimately they are the ones that will back you up. And it could be your co-workers, it could be your family, your partner, doesn't really matter. It's like, who is there to be your support network? And that whole feeling of sharing things. And I think, I fly cadets. I've been flying cadets since I left the Air Force. I did it for 8 years and I left 2 years ago from doing that as a volunteer pilot. So young 13 to 18-year-olds, and I give them an experience for half an hour. And I took this girl up and she basically was actually the most talented aviator in that raw, natural state. But she was also the most miserable person. Having said that, I was locked down with teenage boys, so she wasn't the most miserable person. She was one up from that, but she was sort of like grumpy and I thought, oh God, this is terrible. And we landed having done this half an hour with me pouring all this positive energy into her. And I said, is this something you might want to do? You're really good. And she was like, I bet you said it to everyone. I was like, no, I've never said it to anyone. Is this something you might want to do? You're brilliant. And she said, you are joking. And I said, no. And she said, oh my God, this is all I've ever wanted to do. And I was so scared I was going to fail. I just decided not to show you I was interested and not to try, because I didn't want to give it 100% and then fail, because that would have been really horrible. I always wanted to be able to blame it on the fact that I hadn't tried. And I thought, oh my God, this is from the mouth of a 13, 14-year-old girl.
Sure.
That sums it up for so many people. I thought I couldn't have said it better myself. I see it all the time when someone desperately wants something, they hold back. It's almost like they take a pace back. And that is your differentiator for the people that are so scared of failing. They don't do the Sheryl Sandberg lean in towards it. They back away from it. Yeah, if we go towards and we grab things, you don't know what you can achieve. But that is a very vulnerable position to put yourself in. And people don't like to do that because it's outside their comfort zone. And when I saw this girl, I said to her, how are you doing at school? And she said, I hate that. I said, well, school enables this and you're really good. And then I saw her a year later and she said to me, oh, ma'am, I just wanted to tell you, I got all my exams and I'm going to be joining in the Air Force because I want to be a pilot just like you. And it was these 3 words. And it was like this lightning bolt, because I'd just done my commercial pilot's licenses. I just passed them. I was going to become an airline pilot, and I didn't really want to do that. And it had never been in my heart to do that. But I was doing it because that's what everyone that leaves the Air Force does who's a pilot. They tend to just become an airline, not just become an airline pilot, but they tend to do that. Sure. It's this natural flow. And in that moment, I thought, just like you, I actually can completely change my direction here. I don't have to go into the airlines. I can use my story. I can be that role model. I can be the person that they see, that they say, I can do what I want to do. And that's when I became a speaker. And that's when I started going into schools. And you know what? It's been, honest to God, the most rewarding thing I've ever done.
That is just fabulous, Mandy. I love everything about that story. It's incredible. Well, actually, and so now you're going to make me ask another question. I've now talked to a couple of people who were at the highest level of their profession, their sport, who realized that they didn't love it. They were somewhere they had done really, really well. I mean, meaning world class, and they didn't love what they were doing. And so what I love what you just said is you said, hey, this is what people would just do. You would leave the Air Force, you would be a commercial pilot. That's great for a lot of people. But that's not what you wanted to do necessarily. So you were able to recognize that and own that narrative and shift it to the thing that was a lot more aligned with who it was that you were. How do you, for people who are just pushing, and there's so many pieces that go into that, right? Maybe they're fulfilling somebody else's expectations, or maybe they just have really enjoyed getting the feedback that they're excellent at something. And they get to this very high level where they're expected to continue to go forward. And they say, I don't love this.
Yeah. And I think that takes courage to accept that. I think it does. You have to be bold. Yeah. You have to be brave, and you have to have that honest conversation with yourself. Sure. And there's a really lovely analogy that I really loved, actually, and I'll refer to her book again, Sheryl Sandberg's book. She talks about the career ladder, and she said, you're going up this career ladder, and then sometimes you hit this point in your life where you recognize you don't have to just be on the ladder. You can find yourself on the cargo netting, holding on to this cargo net, hoping not to fall into the ball pit below. It's like this big jungle gym that children go to. Sure. And she said, and just hang on there for a bit, because sometimes that is where you need to be.
Yes.
You don't have to be constantly moving up.
Yes.
Sometimes by taking this moment of reflection on the cargo net, and it could be when the children need you. It could be that point. I took this moment in my career when I had just had my children and I was looking at what my next job would be. And they said to me, Mandy, you're going straight back to the front line. Afghanistan was kicking off. I thought, I've got a 4-month-old and a 21-month-old, how, my husband was an airline pilot. I was like, how is this going to work? I didn't have family that could look after these children. I brought these 2 boys into the world. They might need their mum, I'm still breastfeeding, for God's sake. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And I said, are there any other jobs? He goes, yeah, we can send you up to become an instructor at the Fast Jet Training School at RAF Valley in Anglesey in Wales. That's about a 5-hour journey from where I was living and where my husband was based, flying out of London. I thought, well, God, I'm going to go up there as a single mum because he can't move with me. Sure. And I said, well, I found a job, and it was a job in a second line role, basically looking after the aircraft document set for the Tornado. Everyone in the world thought it was the most boring job in the world. And he said, Mandy, if you take that job, you will never be promoted again. And I'll never forget it. And I thought, if I don't take that job, I will not be able to be a mum. And I actively am choosing that. So I chose the job and gave up on a career.
Yeah.
And actually, I have no regrets, none whatsoever. You know, but ultimately I did a job that a lot of people would consider being the most boring job that a fast jet pilot could be doing.
Sure.
But you sometimes need to make those decisions.
You do. Yeah. So I have one more question for you, although you may have other stories and I'd love them as well. When will there be a princess who has flown the Apache or the Tornado?
Oh, well, that would be cool, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Wouldn't that be cool?
That would be so cool. Yeah, absolutely. We need to get that. Yeah. I'm just thinking we've got a couple of princesses in the market going up at the moment, but I don't think any of them are showing any interest in the military at the moment.
Yeah.
Change that. Definitely.
That's all right. Well, if they hear you speak and if they are introduced to you, undoubtedly they will be inspired in new directions. So thank you
Let's hope so
much.
Brilliant stuff.
No, Mandy, you're awesome. Thank you for this. Really, it's really wonderful to connect with you. And do send me your address because I have 10 of these dolls that I have to give away in public ways somehow. So then we just have to do some LinkedIn post with them or something, and then
that would be fantastic. Let's do that. But I'm so pleased that you managed to get this in, Shannon, honestly, because I've loved the Grit Factor, and it's just, I love watching you and so many of the aviatrixes from America and seeing what you're all up to, and it's been brilliant.
You can find Mandy at mandyhickson.com. That's Mandy, HICKSON.com. And pick up her book, An Officer, Not a Gentleman, anywhere books are sold. There's a link in the show notes to grab your copy at bookshop.org.
Thanks for listening to The Grit Factor. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and share it with a friend. Also, pick up your own copy of The Grit Factor for more candid stories and lessons from leaders in the vanguards of their fields. And invest in yourself and in your team with learning journeys in grit, leadership, purpose, and storytelling at thegritinstitute.com. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll join me for the next episode of The Grit Factor.